You can memorize literally every grammar rule in the English language, ace every test, construct this linguistically flawless sentence, and yet you can still walk into a room and make everyone completely uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time.
Right. Why is that? Well, it's because the diagnostic tools we usually rely on for human communication are, frankly, fundamentally broken.
They are, because we constantly look for the error on the page, right? We look for a misplaced comma or, a dangling participle, subject-verb disagreement.
Textbook stuff.
Exactly. But in these awkward moments you're talking about, the error isn't on the page at all. The error is in the air.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, the words are technically perfect, but the social calibration is completely off.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. If you ever felt that disconnect, this is exactly for you. Today, we're pulling apart an excerpt from a really insightful guide. It's called Linguistic Etiquette, the Formal and Informal English Guide.
It's a great read.
It really is. And our mission today is to solve a very specific communication mystery, which is why you can speak perfectly but still sound awkward, and how to actually sound natural in any environment.
Right. For you listening, we know you might be at a point where you totally understand the mechanics of English, you know the vocabulary, but real-world interactions still feel like you're missing a secret code. Today, we are handing you that code. English is basically this conversational chameleon.
That's a perfect way to put it, yeah. The whole premise of our source material is that English isn't just this robotic system of data transfer. It changes its colors based on the room you're standing in.
Right.
And the biggest hurdle for anyone mastering this is realizing that the goal isn't just accuracy anymore.
It's appropriateness.
Exactly. Appropriateness is the ultimate goal.
So to get to that appropriateness, we need to map out the territory a bit. The guide breaks this down into two primary modes. On one side, we have formal English, which the text categorizes as professional and polite.
And then on the other side, there's informal English, characterized as casual and friendly. And the text gives us what it calls the easy difference trick.
I love this trick.
It's so helpful. It's basically a mental shortcut for you guys listening. Office equals formal, and friends equals informal.
Yeah, that shortcut is just a really great starting line. But we kind of need to look at the mechanics behind it, too.
Okay, lay it on us.
Think about building intimacy versus maintaining structure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Formal English is designed to build a framework where people who don't necessarily know or love each other can interact safely and, respectfully.
Right, there's a distance there.
Exactly. Whereas informal English is designed to strip away those barriers. It creates warmth and vulnerability.
That makes total sense. If we think about this mechanically, it kind of reminds me of a wardrobe, right? Like formal English is this crisp, tailored suit you wear to the office. And informal English is a comfy pair of sweatpants worn around your friends on the weekend.
That is the exact vibe.
But, okay, let me push back on that for a second.
Right.
Because informal is compared to, sweatpants, does that mean informal English is just bad or incorrect English? Like, is it just lazy?
No, not at all. And that's such a common misconception. Informal English is not a mistake. It is the absolute correct register to use when you're chatting, sending text messages, using social media, or just hanging out with your family.
So it's not a lesser form of English.
Not even a little bit. In fact, using formal English in those casual settings would be just as awkward as wearing a tuxedo to a casual hangout in your buddy's basement.
Oh man, imagine showing up to a Super Bowl party in a full tux.
Right. People would think you were completely out of touch.
Totally. Okay, so now that we kind of understand these two modes, we really need to explore where they belong and the social catastrophes that happen when they get mixed up.
The catastrophes are the best part to study, honestly.
They really highlight the rules. The text outlines some specific formal settings, like job interviews, emails, offices, schools, professional meetings, or, talking to seniors.
Yes. And it highlights exact beginner pitfalls, too.
Right, like using informal English in an interview.
Yeah.
Or dropping heavy slang into a professional email. Let's actually role play this really bad example from the text.
Oh, boy, okay. Let's do it.
So imagine I'm walking into a high-stakes job interview. Traditional corporate bank. There's a giant mahogany desk, intimidating leather chairs, the whole 9 yards.
I can picture it.
I walk in, reach across the desk to the hiring manager, and instead of saying, "Good morning, sir," I drop the phrase the text specifically warns against. I look him dead in the eye and say, "Hey, dude."
Oh, wow. The silence in that room would be absolutely deafening.
Just brutal, right. But let's dissect exactly why. Why does "Hey dude" fail so spectacularly in that office setting? I mean, it's a friendly greeting.
It is friendly, sure. But phrases like, hey dude, strip away the respectful and professional markers that formal settings absolutely require.
So it's a lack of awareness.
Exactly. It signals a complete lack of awareness of the office environment. You are claiming this unearned intimacy with someone who, frankly, holds power over your career in that moment.
Right. It's like you're ignoring the structure of the room entirely.
Yes, language is the ultimate indicator of your social awareness. If you can't navigate the boundary of a simple greeting, the interviewer is going to assume you won't be able to navigate the complex boundaries of, say, client negotiation.
Or inter-office conflict.
Exactly. It makes you look incompetent, not just overly friendly.
That is such a good point. Okay, so understanding the settings is great. We know not to say, "Hey dude," in an interview. But how do you, the listener, actually execute this shift? The solution the guide gives us lies in swapping specific words.
Yes, the vocabulary shift. It's the most immediate lever you can pull to change your tone.
The text gives us these great side-by-side comparisons. So contrasting the informal thanks with the formal thank you, or bye with goodbye, and referring to kids versus children.
Just feeling the weight of those words is interesting. Children feel suited for a legal document or a school newsletter.
Right, whereas kids belongs at a backyard barbecue.
Exactly. But the text goes way deeper than just greetings and nouns. It details this really fascinating comparative list of verbs.
Let's hear it.
On the formal side, we have words like assist, purchase, inform, request, apologize.
Okay, let's pause there, because if you compare those to the informal list from the text words like bro, cool, yeah, there's a huge shift in the vibe.
Oh, definitely.
Especially if we look at verbs. Like, compare the informal help to the formal assist. If I am drowning in a pool, I am screaming, help. I am definitely not yelling, assist me.
Right. You would never say that. And that visceral reaction you just described perfectly highlights the psychological difference between the two registers.
How so?
Well, help is emotional, it's urgent, it's personal, and it implies a direct, intimate dependency. Assist, on the other hand, removes all that emotion. It's procedural.
Procedural. That is the perfect word for it.
Yeah. When you ask a colleague to assist you, you aren't begging them for a personal favor, right? You are asking them to perform a function within the framework of your shared professional duties.
Wow. So you are protecting their personal boundaries by keeping the request professional.
Exactly.
That is a massive insight for anyone listening who struggles with feeling like formal English is, I don't know, too cold or robotic.
It's not cold at all. It's protective.
Protective. I love that.
Yeah.
Now, looking further at the guide's lists, I zeroed in on a really interesting structural difference. The text highlights the shift from the informal word can't to the formal word cannot.
Yes. The removal of the contraction.
Yes. We take two words, can and not, and in casual speech, we just smash them together with an apostrophe for speed. Can't.
Right.
But formal English demands that we unshrink that contraction. Cannot. By forcing you to pronounce the whole phrase, it instantly elevates the formality. So my question for you is part of formal English really just about taking the time to say the full words?
Yes, absolutely. The physical act of speaking is totally linked to formality. Taking the time to fully articulate words without shortcuts alters the entire rhythm of the interaction.
It slows you down.
Exactly. Formality requires deliberation. It requires taking up a little more space and time to demonstrate respect. The text actually gives us an excellent full sentence comparison to show this.
Oh, the meeting example.
Yes. Let's look at the informal sentence first. I'm going to call you later.
I'm going to call you later. The pacing there is incredibly fast. Like going to just blends right into gonna. It's efficient, breezy. It's almost like a passing thought.
Right. Now, analyze the pacing and structure of the formal equivalent the guide provides. Please inform me about the meeting.
Wow. Yeah. You literally cannot rush through that sentence the same way.
You can't.
The syllables demand that you slow down. Your tongue and your lips literally have to do more work. And the word inform is just so much more deliberate than call.
Exactly. By avoiding slang like gonna and by unshrinking contractions, you physically break your speech. You put the brakes on. That slower, more deliberate pacing is universally interpreted by a listener as thoughtful and respectful. You are dedicating more of your literal time and breath to the interaction.
Which signals to the other person that they're worth that extra effort.
Precisely.
That is brilliant. Slowness as a currency of respect. It shifts the focus from just, what are the right words, to How am I delivering these words?
And understanding that mechanism really takes the pressure off. You aren't just memorizing lists of vocabulary anymore. You're feeling the rhythm of the room.
Okay, so we've mapped the theory. We understand the protective nature of formal vocabulary and the respectful pacing of unshrunk words. But theory tends to evaporate when you're actually under pressure in the real world.
Oh, completely.
So let's put this into practice. Let's do a linguistic makeover. We'll take some real sentences from the text and convert them.
Sounds good. The guide offers some very clear phrase conversions that serve as excellent templates.
So let's take a common workplace scenario. Say you require assistance with a project. If you are operating in the informal mode with a friend, you might use the phrase provided in the text, can you help me? Or even the more direct, I need help.
Right. And I need help works perfectly on a text thread with a friend if you're trying to move a couch.
Yeah, it's blunt, but the established intimacy covers the bluntness. They know you, they love you, it's fine.
But if you drop I need help onto a colleague's desk in a corporate office, it lands like a demand. The bluntness is no longer covered by intimacy.
It's just abrasive.
Exactly. So how do we rebuild this sentence for the office environment? The text transforms the casual "can you help me" into the highly formal "could you please help me?" Or, better yet, using our procedural verb, "could you assist me?"
Let's really look under the hood of that formal sentence. What is happening mechanically when we change I need help to could you please assist me?
The primary mechanism at work here is the introduction of a politeness buffer. When you declare I need help, the gravitational pull of the sentence is entirely centered on you.
Right. Your needs, your emergency.
Exactly. It leaves no room for the other person to comfortably say no.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And in a professional setting, preserving the other person's autonomy is paramount. When you shift the phrasing to, could you please assist me, you are decentering yourself and centering their agency.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. The word could acknowledges their capability and implicitly gives them the option to say they cannot. You add the polite buffer of please, and you use assist to frame it as a procedural task rather than an emotional crisis.
So you're basically softening the edges of the demand so it can slide smoothly into their workflow.
Exactly.
That completely reframes how I view these rules. It's not about being stuffy or snobby. It's simply about reducing friction between two professionals.
That's it, exactly. And we see the same friction reduction in another example from the text's practice section, converting the informal thanks a lot to the formal thank you very much.
Let me guess. We see the unshrinking again?
Yep.
Thanks stretches out into thank you. And then the casual intensifier a lot upgrades to the formal intensifier very much.
Right, because a lot is this unquantifiable casual measurement, whereas very much carries a weightier, more traditional cadence. It's kind of the linguistic equivalent of handing someone a signed receipt rather than just giving them a thumbs up.
A signed receipt versus a thumbs up. I love that imagery.
Yeah.
For you listening, a highly practical way to deploy this in your daily life is to develop a mental clutch. Like shifting gears in a manual car.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, so imagine you draft an email to a new client in your head, right? And your brain naturally defaults to your comfortable everyday speech. You think, hey, can you help me with this? Thanks a lot.
Right, the sweatpants version.
Exactly. But before your fingers actually hit the keyboard, you engage that mental clutch. You pause. You acknowledge you're in the office mode. You unshrink the contractions. You swap the emotional verbs for procedural ones, and you add the buffers to protect their autonomy. So what actually gets typed out is, good morning, could you please assist me with this? Thank you very much.
Yes. Engaging that mental clutch for just a fraction of a second is really the ultimate goal of the guide. It's that intentional pause to ask yourself, am I building intimacy right now, or am I maintaining structure?
And the true beauty of this is that it validates everything you already know. You've learned the slang, the contractions, the casual flow. Keep it.
Please keep it.
Yeah, that is your toolkit for connection. It's for family, for friends. You aren't unlearning anything. You're just realizing that English has a dual clutch transmission, and you are finally learning how to shift between the two gears.
Mastering a language means having access to the full spectrum of its utility. When you know how to operate the formal mode, just as well as the informal mode, you eliminate the awkwardness, because you are always aligned with the social reality of the room.
Which actually brings us to a really fascinating crossroads as we wrap up today.
Yeah.
We've spent this entire deep dive treating the division between formal and informal English as a relatively stable boundary, right? Office equals formal, friends equals informal. But But language is notoriously rebellious. It refuses to stay in the neat little boxes we build for it.
Oh, it's constantly shifting beneath our feet. And that shift is largely driven by the mediums we use to communicate.
Exactly. And this leaves me with a thought I want to pose to you, the listener, just a provocative scenario for you to mull over. Right now, our source material draws a hard line, protecting the office from the informal English of text messages and social media. But consider the current trajectory of the workforce. Entire generations, Gen Z, Generation Alpha, are entering the corporate world, having grown up communicating almost exclusively via short-form text, emojis, and highly casual, fragmented syntax.
Yeah, their baseline for what constitutes effective communication is fundamentally different than the generation that wrote the corporate rulebook.
Totally different.
Yeah.
So fast forward to a corporate board meeting in the year 2040, when the people who grew up on group chats are the CEOs, the hiring managers, and the policy writers. Will that formal structure even exist in the way we know it today?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Might the informal, abbreviation-heavy, contraction-filled English of today's text messages slowly bleed into the boardrooms, until BRB and hey guys become the accepted, high-status language of international business?
It really forces us to ask if the structure of formality will survive, or if the drive for relentless, casual efficiency will just overwrite the system entirely.
Will sweatpants eventually become the standard issue for every office? It's something to think about the next time you hesitate over hitting send on an email, wondering if you use too many exclamation points.
Definitely.
The rules are real today, but they are always in motion. Until next time, keep reading the room, keep using that mental clutch, and keep analyzing the language around you.